Welcome to this new Photography 101 course. Now, this series is going to be aimed at the beginning and novice photographer. I'm going to be showing you how to use your camera, how to shoot in manual, and some basic compositional elements inside of photography. Now, one thing I should let you know, simply watching these videos isn't going to make you a good photographer and not going to give you the ability to go out and take great photos. You're going to need to watch a video, practice, practice, practice. Watch the next video, practice, practice, practice. They're made to layer and build up concepts over time until you get it. Some people who are not technical might struggle with this in the beginning. Don't worry. Eventually it's going to click in your head and you're going to understand what's going on. The math is actually really simple. The problem is the numbering system is a little bit confusing at the beginning. So we're going to start off this series. I'm going to talk a little bit about a DSLR and a mirrorless camera. And then the second part of the video, I'm going to go over memory cards, which is actually very helpful. These are things or items that you want to take a look at before you actually go buy them. This is going to be helpful to make sure that you purchase something that is actually going to be functional. I hope you enjoy this series and let's get started. Welcome to my introduction to photography. So today we're going to take a look at two different styles of cameras. Now the first camera, which we see up here, is called a DSLR. Now a DSLR stands for Digital Single Lens Reflex. And below that we have what's called a mirrorless camera. Now we're kind of at this point now where it seems to be that mirrorless is going to be the future of photography, and we are going to slowly see DSLR fading out and slowly mirrorless taking over. Now at this point, we still have both DSLR and mirrorless, and DSLR at this point, especially for entry-level cameras, is by far a cheaper option for what you get compared to mirrorless. This doesn't mean that mirrorless is lesser of a camera. Actually, a lot of the new mirrorless cameras are absolutely incredible. You're going to be paying the same price as a high-end professional DSLR as you are with mirrorless. So let's take a look at the difference between digital single lens reflex and mirrorless. And it's actually really simple. Now, this is a crude drawing and I'll sort of explain it. So let's take a look at how this DSLR works. It's very simple. We have our subject, and the light from the subject passes through the camera and hits a mirror. This little line at a diagonal is a mirror, and it reflects the image up here into a prism. Now, it actually kind of goes around the prism and out, but we're just going to say it goes up into the prism and then out, and you look at it through an optical viewfinder. And this is one of the key differences here. DSLR has an optical viewfinder and a mirrorless has an electronic viewfinder. So that light once again goes through, hits the mirror, up into a prism, and then out the optical viewfinder. When you are taking the photo, the mirror pops up and the light passes by the mirror because it's not there anymore, and a shutter opens and hits this red thing, which would be your sensor, and that's how you capture the image. The way a mirrorless camera is quite a bit different. So basically that light passes through the front of the camera just like that. But in this case, there's no mirror. So it goes right in and hits that sensor. That sensor reads the information and it can do two things. One, it can capture the image, but it also transmits a signal into the electronic viewfinder and you see that digitally. Now there is a difference in the way this works. When you look through a DSLR, you cannot tell if your exposure is correct by looking through your viewfinder. However, in a mirrorless camera, as you adjust your shutter, aperture, and ISO, you'll be able to see a difference in exposure because it's using the information as it hits the sensor and then transmits it. And so that's the main difference between a mirrorless and a DSLR. You'll notice that mirrorless cameras to be a little bit thinner and a little bit lighter, and the DSLR is going to be a little bit more boxy. Now, some people like the bigger, boxier camera, and some people like the smaller, thinner cameras. One of the problems with the first mirrorless cameras is a lot of people with large hands did not like them because the body was actually too small, and they were preferring the DSLR just because it had a better feel. Now, you've noticed in the professional cameras now that they're actually making the grip or the camera a little bit larger, so it's more comfortable for those who have larger hands. So once again, DSLR comes through, hits a mirror, comes up to a prism, goes into an optical viewfinder. And when you want to take the picture, the mirror flaps up, light passes by that, hits the sensor, and you capture the image. A mirrorless camera, the light passes straight through, hits the sensor. The sensor can either take an image or transmit the signal to an electronic viewfinder. And in the electronic viewfinder, you can also see the variance in exposures. Now, there is an option that you can remove this, so when you shoot in a studio, that you can still see your image, but we'll get into that at a later time. Now, the next thing that's going to be important when picking a camera or using a camera is there's actually two completely different size sensors in cameras. Most of your entry-level cameras, whether mirrorless or DSLR, are going to be using what's called a cropped sensor. So it's going to be a smaller sensor. Then in your higher end cameras, you're going to start to see a lot more full frame cameras. Basically, in the full frame camera, there is no crop factor for your camera. So if you have a 50mm lens with a full frame camera, that 50mm lens is a 50mm focal length. However, if you have a crop sensor and you use a 50mm lens, there is a crop factor to that lens. The crop factor of a crop sensor camera is usually around 1.5 or 1.6. So that means that same 50mm lens needs to be multiplied by 1.5, which would make it 75mm lens, or 1.6, which would make it an 80mm lens. So it's something to pay attention to. If you're using a standard lens that works on both full frame and crop sensors, and you put that lens on a full frame camera, that 50mm lens is going to be a 50mm lens. But if you put that same lens on a crop sensor camera, it's either going to be a 75 or an 80mm lens, so a longer focal length. Now, this can be kind of cool sometimes when you have longer lenses. If you have a longer lens, it's going to really increase your focal length. However, your wide angle lenses become longer focal length, which isn't always the best option. So that's the difference between a full frame and a cropped sensor camera. All right, so the next thing before we take a look at the camera is we're going to cover memory cards. Now, there's 5 different memory cards that we see here, and all of these will work in certain cameras. Some of these will work in all of them, and some of these will work in only certain cameras. And let me tell you what these are. So this first one is a micro SD. This is called an SD. This is called XQD. This is a compact flash. This is a CF Express, or compact flash Express. Now, the original cards that came out for cameras were this and this. So the SD and the compact flash. And then they came out with micro SD. Obviously we have, and really this isn't something that you want to use in a camera. And then we have this, which was brought out by Sony, and they were made to be used either in Sony, and Nikon adopted them, so you can find QXD in Nikon as well. And then most recently we have the CF Express cards. So the first common factor is how much data do they all hold. Now, all these are all different, but you can find any one of these cards in any configuration that you want. So we can see right here, this holds the most actually of 1 terabyte. This one holds 8 gigabytes. This is 240 gigabytes. This is 32 gigabytes and 64 gigabytes. And obviously, the more gigabytes or data that it can hold, the more images that you're going to be able to write to your card. Now, that's wonderful, but what's more important in a card is what's called the read-write speeds. And this is what you really need to take a look into. And this is where the micro SD card falls short. A lot of places will sell you micro SD cards with an adapter, and the micro SD goes into an adapter that looks like an SD card, and then it allows you to use a micro SD in an SD card. This is definitely not something that you want to do. You're obviously better at buying a straight SD card versus a micro SD card. It's just going to be more reliable and most likely a whole lot faster. Now right here we can see in this card it says 40 megabytes per second. Now this is referring to its read speed. Now cards have a read and a write speed, and a lot of times your read speed is going to be faster than your write speed. Read speed would be used for somewhere like if you wanted to preview your image on the back of your camera, it's going to read that image off this card. Your write speed would be how fast it can write to the card. What a lot of manufacturers do, especially on these slower cards, is they only display read speed. And the reason for this is they don't want to display the write speed, which a lot of times is considerably slower. So I don't know exactly what this card is, but let's say the read speed's 40 megabytes per second. It might be only 10 for write speed, which is very slow. You want to get the fastest read-write speeds as possible. Another advantage of the faster, more pro cards, and with SanDisk, that they're usually black like this, and this comes in a black version too, a pro version. The pro versions offer a couple of things. If your card ever breaks, they will replace the card for free. And you also usually with SanDisk get free recovery software. So if you need to recover some data off your card, you're going to get that free software whenever you purchase a pro card. And a pro SD card you can usually get for $20. It's usually between, I don't know, 15 to, depending on how big the card is, $15 to $25. So they're not that expensive. On this QXD card, you can see they have both the read and the write speeds listed. So this read speed on this card, 440 megabytes per second, which is this is only 40 megabytes per second. So a whole lot faster read-write speeds. Your write speed is 400 megabytes per second. On this, we have a 160 megabyte per second read speed, and it's not listing what its write speed is. It's probably pretty close to this, but I'm not seeing it on here. So we're just going to say this is 160 megabytes per second. Now this is the original compact flash. You can get a compact flash like this that's a newer card that has a much faster read-write speeds. Those are out now. The last thing that we have here is what's going to be the fastest card out. These are CF Express cards. Now you need to make sure that your camera can accept and use a CF Express card before you buy one. It's great that they're faster, but sometimes you might only be able to use an SD card or maybe a QXD. So you need to know what type of card your camera uses in the first place. In my case, my camera uses compact flash and an SD. So the CF Express card has a read speed 1500 megabytes per second, as this one only had 440. You can see it's way faster, and a write speed of 400 megabytes per second. This is really the most important factor in all of these cards because you want to have the fastest card that you can afford to get. This is just going to save you time in the long run. The last thing that we're going to take a look at and is important on cards are the class of the card. If you notice, this down here is a class 3 card, and this is actually a pretty fast card. This will actually allow you to use 4K or 2K video. So this is actually, though a micro SD, an extremely fast card because it's allowing us to shoot 2K and 4K video. If you have a card like this, you can see this is a class 10 and then this is a class 7. If you have something that looks like this, a circle and a 3, you can only shoot HD video with it. If you have something like a 2 or a 1 card, you can only shoot standard video. You can't shoot HD video. The card isn't fast enough to be able to write as fast as the data stream comes in. So if you want to shoot HD video, you need to have a 3 to 10 card. this would work, and this would work. The next thing that we have are these ones. So you're going to find one with either a 1 or a 3. A 3 is going to be the fastest. And this type of class card is going to be able to let you to shoot 2K and 4K video. So if you need to shoot 2K and 4K, you're going to need faster class card than this or this. So that is a little bit about memory cards. I'm a big fan of SanDisk. Sony cards are also good. Now there's a whole bunch of other cards that people will try to sell you, like PNY and Kingston. They're just not good cards. SanDisk is an easy brand to find and very reliable. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. If you have any comments or questions, you can leave those below. And as always, don't forget to subscribe.